Remember that this video is not for idiots. In that case, we suggest you go unwrap candies with your buttocks.
Today I will tell you the story of one of the bloodiest bosses that there have been in Italy. Known worldwide as the boss of bosses. Of mafia bosses who truly caused damage both within the mafia structure by decimating all the old bosses, those who had somewhat settled into earning through contracts, constructions, etc., and who also caused a lot of damage against the state, killing many magistrates, police officers, all those who investigated against him, including journalists and not only them, and who reached up to such an extent that a state mafia pact was requested to cease these hostilities. We will talk about Toto Riina, the most ferocious boss, also known as Toto Curtu, because he was short, 1 meter 58, but he was a concentrate of unique ferocity and wickedness. A criminal career that I will summarize for you in a few words, because otherwise you'd fall asleep. If you're interested, stay. If not, gentlemen, go to a nice sale of panettones, buy them all, and build a sofa made of panettones. He is originally from Corleone, this town Corleone are renowned because obviously characters of incredible criminal stature were born there. In the 1930, right after the World War, he and his family basically managed by being farmers, but not farmers, cultivating the land. They looked after livestock for others. Very low education, almost non-existent. A family that made their children work already at 5 or 6 years old, earning some money by finding things, repairing things, reselling things. And precisely because of this, the family was decimated because they wanted to collect an unexploded bomb from the Second World War. The father died and the younger brother, while the other brother is injured. Toto Riina immediately proves himself to be a criminal of a certain stature. His first real conviction at 19 years old for murder. What do? The first conviction is for murder. He had killed a peer of his during a fight over trivial motives. He is rearrested again in 1963 after having served a few years of detention. That is, of the 12 years he was given, he had served 5 or 6. Then somehow he got out. In 63 he is found with a false document, a weapon, and he tries to escape. At that point, they take him back in and add the previous years to the new ones they caught him with, 5 or 6 years, and he's out. When he gets out, he had already found another so-called friend who would later betray him, Gaspare Mutolo. But before the second conviction, he had already joined Luciano Liggio's group along with Leoluca Bagarella and Bernardo Provenzano. Like everything that arises in the countryside, a little bit, under the radar and so on, they get underestimated. In reality, there was a person who did not underestimate them. In fact, he drafted a very detailed report where he pointed out that he found a group of extremely ferocious, extremely dangerous young people who were ready to rise and had nothing to lose. This person was the lieutenant of the Carabinieri in the Corleone command, Lieutenant Carlo Alberto Dalla Chiesa, who was then a young lieutenant and would later become the famous General Carlo Alberto Dalla Church. One of the turning points, let's say, of this group led by Luciano Liggio, but effectively led by Luciano Liggio, along with Toto Riina, who was his right-hand man, an armed enforcer, violent enforcer, however we want to call him, is in 1958 when they killed the Corleone boss. The boss at that time was Dr. Michel Navarra. Why doctor? Because he was a doctor and was the director of the hospital. They kill him with machine gun fire practically. Removing the Corleone boss from the group tends to grow more and more. Luciano Liggio was not extremely fierce like his men were, but he was a man who knew how to weave relationships of a certain level. They take control of all the national smuggling and start to connect with the 'Ndrangheta through Mirko Tripodo, who becomes a ring partner of Toto Riina, and with the Camorra through the Nuvoletta. thanks to this work of Liggio, managed to gain the support of two of the strongest criminal organizations in Italy, but they also need politics, and in that instance they are represented by Vito Ciancimino, former mayor of Palermo, who establishes a connection with Salvo Lima to link with Andriotti's faction. Therefore, we are talking about the main party of the country because the Christian Democratic Party and Andriotti were the most important. From that moment on, a contrast arises between the old mafia groups and this new mafia group ready for action, because the old mafia groups maintained a very low profile and worked on what were public contracts, especially after the earthquake of the 68, on what was the construction and everything that could be gained by staying on the legal side, but being illegal, because then anyway, they obtained the contracts through corruption, threats and so on, but all done with a low profile. The Lighiani, the Corleonesi on the other hand, only caused chaos. In 1960, a bomb explodes and kills 7 carabinieri, attracting the attention of the entire nation compared to that area. Obviously, the Corleonesi are their characters who know when they need to disappear. They know how to disappear well because they are used to living in the countryside on the mountains. Yes, they hide everywhere, live with little in hiding and stay hidden until things calm down. They continue working in cigarette smuggling using front companies, but they discover a truly important business that will give them strength to grow and eliminate the competition. In the 1970s, they start with kidnappings of person of whom we have already seen other characters, the same kidnappings that were also carried out by the Marseillais, the same kidnappings that were later also carried out by the Magliana gang, were a business. But the Sicilian mafia, particularly the Corleonesi, targeted people because they even kidnapped Polghetti's son. It is said that they were behind the kidnapping of Giovanni Bulgari. However, among the kidnapped there were many: Luigi Rossi di Montelera, Saverio Garonzi, Luigi Genghini, Renata Lavagna, all names that mean nothing now, but they were all people, children of industrialists, wealthy people who generally was ready to pay just to have their loved ones back. During this period of abductions, Gaetano Badalamenti, who at the time he was part of the triumvirate that commanded the mafia groups along with Luciano Liggio, they decreed that it was time to stop these kidnappings because they attracted attention to all the other dealings that the mafia, the older, more soft-spoken one, carried out in a manner a little more peacefully. The group of Luciano Liggio began buying properties, many properties, then used rosorare, they used for 1,000 purposes. Some were given away, others were kept in use, and others were just investments to launder all the money they had collected. But the big shift came with the arrest of Luciano Liggio. If Toto Riina was already a figure who was managing, let's say, or co-managing with Luciano Liggio this mafia faction. In 1974, when Luciano is arrested in Milan, Toto Riina effectively becomes the leader of the Corleonesi. At that, he takes Luciano Liggio's place in the commission. Within the commission, he understands perfectly how it works and begins his attack from within. He takes down all the important bosses, starting with Stefano Bontate. Later, he eliminates Salvatore Inzerillo, who was extremely difficult to kill because he always traveled with a customized armored car that he had made for himself. They had to wait for quite some time until one day, on the way from his house to the armored car, they managed to surprise him and to kill him. At that point, the escalation, the first famous mafia war, had already begun. Anyone who stood against was eliminated. Toto Riina gained success precisely because you were either with him or against him. Anyone who opposed him would eventually be eliminated, if not today, then tomorrow. If not tomorrow, then the day after. In 1978, the boss of D also falls. Cristina, with this blow, Toto Riina's overwhelming power is further strengthened. But it's not just a matter of power, it's that no one wanted to go against him because they knew that these would have shot. And if one wasn't ready to go to war with him, it wasn't worth it. Too many people got involved, including politicians and police officers, and he took them down as well. Michel Reina, who was the undersecretary of the local Christian democracy, is killed. The head of the mobile unit, Boris Giuliani, Luciano is killed despite being one of the most important ones. Councillor Cesare Terranova is killed. The president of the region, Piersanti Mattarella, is also killed, and he doesn't even spare captain of the Carabinieri, Emanuele Basile, and the public prosecutor, Gaetano Costa. Guys, a massacre. He struck everywhere. State, mafia, innocence. It was indifferent. Anyone who got in the way was killed, and if he couldn't kill that person, he would wipe out their family. You understand the level of brutality that was within the Corleonese organization. This system of unheard of violence, transversal, continuous, catching practically everyone off guard, from mafia bosses to institutions. Not by chance, Ishito, even the institutions remain paralyzed because they killed the magistrate, they killed the chief of police, they killed the president of the region, etc. You say, what do they have in mind? In reality, what emerges is that in the ignorance of Toto Riina and his cronies emerges their idea of we kill everyone, but who cares? That is, they haven't studied, they don't know the difference between a judge and a commissioner. For them, they are men of the state. They are in the way. We kill them. As I was saying, Toto Riina was at the point after having killed so many people. Either you were with him or you were against him. In 1982, the report of this first mafia war is over 1,000 people within 3 years. And among these is also General Carlo Alberto Dalla Chiesa, who was the first to notice these young men and who had drafted the report when he was a lieutenant in the Carabinieri and commander of the Corleone group. He had been sent to Palermo as a prefect because they thought he might be the only one that with a firm hand might have stopped the rise of the Corleonesi, given that in the force he had achieved great results against terrorism. From 1982, he decided to go against this group of Corleonesi by scrutinizing them and finding many elements that could pin them down, particularly by following the flow of money and real estate. Carlo Alberto Dalla Chiesa had taken the right path. What happens? However, like all the inconvenient Corleonesi people, it was decided to eliminate him. His elimination is another extremely violent one, because Carlo Alberto Dalla Chiesa, his wife Manuela Setti, and the escort agent are killed. The most serious thing is that with the death of Carlo Alberto Dalla Chiesa, people start truly think that there will never be a solution against these bloodthirsty beasts. Not by chance a sign is hung there where Carlo Alberto Dalla Chiesa died with the words, "Here hope died at honest Palermitans." But in reality, Toto Riina does not stop there. That is, what's even more serious is that after all this series of deaths, after killing key figures who had really arrived there just to oppose them, he begins to target the famous trail of magistrates, and he starts to target Rocco Cinici along with judges Giacomo Caccio Montalto and Antonino Saetta, as well as all the police officers who were following them as escorts, Nini Casarà, Beppe Montana and Calogero Zucchetto. With this wave of extreme violence, they continue to dominate, to the point of reaching a certain aim to negotiate with the state. But before this, on May 23rd, 1992, riuscirono to Pafunoch-Shin. They also killed Judge Falcone. It is a murder of enormous cruelty. The media impact, I practically experienced it. A piece of highway was blown up with explosives. They did. Judge Falcone was killed along with his wife Francesca Morvillo and 3 escort agents. Consider that the last anti-mafia bulwark left was Judge Borsellino. But on July 19, 1992, they also target Judge Borsellino, who was even killed with 5 escort agents. After all this, Toto Riina had crossed every limit, but he had surpassed not only a limit, obviously, for the people, municipalities, but also for those who collaborated with him and feared him. It reached the point where people started to repent, people who until a short time ago had stayed by his side, despite this carnage and this reckless crushing machine. Leonardo Messina, Giuseppe Marchese, Balduccio Di Maggio, and Gaspare Mutolò, during his second detention, decide to cooperate.
The majority of the arrests were thanks to Tommaso Buscita, who was one of the representatives of the mafia in the United States, who then moved to Brazil and who nevertheless knew the mafia structure perfectly, but in particular also thanks to Totuccio Contorno, who was also encouraged by Tommaso Buscetta to repent, which completed the picture. Missing Tommaso Buscetta, who, despite knowing the structure, did not know certain details. And so it was that 127 people ended up in the Maxi trial. The mafia organization were decimated, and gradually more and more people inside repented, also to dissociate from what was that bloodthirsty monster of Riina.
And those who still followed him, despite people who were about to repent being killed or their families being killed, gradually increased, always with more, because Toto Riina, during his time on the run, continued to have the repentant or alleged ones. The key case was Buscetta, who, despite being there to talk, saw half his family killed by Toto Riina. At that point, he even had a moment when he stopped, only to resume later.
Anyway, fortunately, this affair ends thanks to Balduccio Di Maggio, who ensures that Toto Riina gets arrested. The curious thing is that Toto Riina was still in Palermo, in a villa within the city, very visible and large, and he had not been arrested yet, if not for Balduccio Di Maggio, and only in 1995 is he transferred to the maximum security prison of Asinara, and obviously subjected to harsh imprisonment. One of the most controversial things is the infamous state mafia pact, where Toto Riina with the Papello was a sort of sheet where he had written a whole series of conditions for better management of the maximum security prisons, that there should not be any, that life sentences should be abolished, all things in quotes absurd for a normal state, but that are said to have been discussed with representatives of the state. The important thing is that they made him stay at 41
during his entire imprisonment. I had several health problems, heart surgeries, and so on. I also had 4 children, 2 females and 2 males, and of the 2 males, one was convicted for various murders, while the other went back and forth in prison for mafia association. In 2017 he died, but the figure of Toto Riina was one of the cruelest, most concerning figures in Italy. It was that mafia, that criminality, that not only conducted its business dirty, but publicly killed anyone who got in the way of these affairs, and did it to make it clear that no one could oppose him, neither within institutions, nor among other criminal organizations, nor among ordinary people. This led to, however, his reign of terror lasted so many years, until at a certain point there was even disappointment from the criminals by his side. And that says a lot. The boss of bosses who dies in prison, like all the criminals who are caught and who were once thought uncatchable. That said, if you are interested in other videos about crime, about criminal figures, but also about people who made a difference against crime, write to me. See you in the next video. Bye.